Imagine you are standing in the middle of a glamorous Western country. On paper, it is one of the world's wealthiest empires, but if you scratch the surface, you start noticing some very strange symptoms. A super rich capital drowning in luxury while the rest of the country is stuck in stagnation. A massive ballooning national debt. Politics so divided it is paralyzed. And a government that increasingly depends on foreign investors just to keep the lights on. Sounds like a Latin American country struggling with a crisis in the 90s, right? But no. Welcome to France, and welcome to Capital Anatomy. When you fold the economic map of France in half, you will notice it does not match up at all. You are essentially looking at two completely different countries stuffed inside a single border. In the center, there is the Île-de-France region, Paris and its surrounding areas. It operates like an independent economic machine with labor productivity nearly 40% higher than the national average, pulling in almost 63% of the highest paying, most highly skilled jobs. But step away from those glamorous lights and head north along the old industrial belts. You land in places like Hauts-de-France, where unemployment climbs past 15%, infrastructure is deteriorating, and the rate of youth not in education, employment, or training crosses 17%. This is the classic pattern of developing economies, a giant growth pole concentrating all the capital and talent at the center, while the rest of the country deals with a slow but steady lack of economic oxygen. Now, you might be wondering, if the economy is so structurally divided, why does the French stock market still look like it belongs to a true superpower? The answer is what might be called the luxury paradox. Every year, the luxury industry brings France roughly $75 billion in export revenue. Just 4 companies, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, L'Oréal, and Kering, make up 38% of the entire weight of the CAC 40 index. Using the stock market as a gauge for France's economic health is like a doctor looking at the expensive watch on your wrist and concluding your vitals are perfectly fine. It is a statistical illusion. Making luxury leather goods or perfumes requires highly specific skills concentrated in traditional workshop clusters. And it does not pull along a massive supply chain the way a steel mill or car factory does. A Hermès bag costs more than a used car, but its profits never reach the pockets of an unemployed mechanic in the suburbs. The top of the pyramid is doing well. The foundation is showing cracks. This structural disconnect is most visible in the youth. The youth unemployment rate in France is currently hovering around 18%. And the country's social security system, famously known as one of the most generous in the world, has a significant blind spot. If you are under 25 and do not have a job, you do not automatically receive the minimum welfare benefit the way older people do. That generous safety net has a large gap right where the next generation stands. These structural pressures lead directly to the fiscal picture. And from 1974 until today, the French state has never recorded a single year where revenue exceeded spending, not once in over 50 years. Public debt has tripled in just 25 years, reaching nearly 3.4 trillion euros. France's social protection spending currently takes up about 33% of its gross domestic product, the highest rate in the entire bloc of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries. Nearly 60% of French households receive more in state benefits than they contribute in taxes. When France tried to close the gap by taxing high net worth individuals more heavily, a significant share of those individuals relocated to Belgium or Switzerland, taking their capital and investment activity with them. France is estimated to have lost between 143 billion and 200 billion euros in assets through that process. 3 pressures are now compressing simultaneously. The first is demographic. France's pension system operates on the pay-as-you-go model, where current workers fund current retirees. In 2024, only 663,000 babies were born, down over 21% from a decade earlier. Meanwhile, up to 800,000 baby boomers retire every year, while only 700,000 young people enter the workforce. France is dedicating nearly 14% of its gross domestic product just to fund pensions, a figure that exceeds the combined education, defense, and transportation budgets. The second is deindustrialization. The manufacturing has shrunk from roughly 26% of the French economy in the 1980s down to about 13% today. Nearly 900,000 factory jobs have disappeared over the past 2 decades. The cause is largely structural. To fund its welfare model, France taxes labor heavily, with employer social charges running close to 50% on top of the base salary, compared to around 30% in Germany and 20% in Poland. Combined with elevated energy costs, manufacturing in France has become increasingly difficult to justify on a balance sheet. The third is political paralysis. The French lower house is currently split into 5 major factions with no single group holding a majority. After recent political turbulence, Prime Minister Michel Barnier lasted roughly 3 months before a no-confidence vote removed him, the first time this has happened since 1962. Pushing the retirement age from 62 to 64 triggered months of nationwide protests and permanently damaged the governing coalition's standing. Meaningful fiscal reform has effectively become a political non-starter. The bond market is beginning to reflect these pressures. In 2024, France's deficit reached approximately 75 billion euros, equal to 6% of its economic output. The spread between French government bonds and German government bonds widened to nearly 80 basis points following recent political shocks, and about 53% of France's debt is held by foreign investors, which creates the kind of sensitivity to confidence shocks more commonly associated with emerging market economies. The irony here is that France was among the founding architects of the European Union's fiscal rules, which require member states to maintain deficits below 3% of gross domestic product and debt below 60%. France currently runs a 6% deficit and carries debt above 113%. The broader takeaway is not specific to France. It is about the gap that can develop between a country's visible indicators of wealth and the underlying structural health of its economy. A thriving luxury sector and a packed tourism industry are genuinely significant, but they cannot substitute for broad-based productivity growth, a functioning industrial base, and a sustainable fiscal path. And when the structural math changes, whether through demographics, deindustrialization, or decades of deficit spending, the financial markets will eventually catch up to reality, regardless of how long the political system takes to acknowledge it. France is not in freefall. It is a country with deep institutional strength, world-class infrastructure, and genuine technological capability. But the gap between the structural pressures it faces and the pace of reform it has managed to achieve is widening. The question is not whether France can address these issues, it is whether its political system can move fast enough to act before external financial pressure forces the decision. If this breakdown helped you see beyond the headline numbers and into the structural mechanics underneath, hit the like button and share it with someone who follows economics and global finance. Subscribe to Capital Anatomy so you do not miss our next deep dive analysis. We break down the systems behind the stories every single week.